Amputated Baptist Podcast. We gather around to talk theology, politics, and the sweet banjo sound. Kevin Thompson leads the way, teacher and preacher too. With a men's quartet, the harmonies ring true. Gather around the mic, let's find our way, singing praises, strumming banjo strings all day. Amputated Baptist Podcast, where we all belong. Join the harmony, let it carry us along. With a passion for faith and a banjo by our side, we don't deep, we don't hide, we take it all in stride. From parables to politics, every topic on the table, let's harmonize together, let's make it stable. In the chord progressions we find our peace, singing praises, strumming banjo strings all day. Amputated Baptist Podcast, where we all belong. Join the harmony, let it carry us along.
Theology, politics, and a little bit of banjo. You're listening to the Amputated Baptist Podcast. And now, here is your host, the Amputated Baptist himself, Kevin Thompson.
All right, hello and welcome back to the Amputated Baptist Podcast. And I am your host, the Amputated Baptist himself, Kevin Thompson. And we're welcoming on the podcast today, Pastor Curtis King. Pastor King, welcome back. Well, actually, I can't say welcome back because you've never been on this podcast, but you have been on previous podcasts I've done. So welcome to this podcast for the very first time.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited. Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, you're a pastor, but you're also kind of an entrepreneur, and I'm going to throw in nerd on top of that. So, tell us, introduce yourself.
Well, I think you're the second person in the last few weeks to refer to me as an entrepreneur. I've never called myself that before. I thank you. I appreciate that. I am a pastor. Pastor here in Liberty, South Carolina. Love my church, love my people, and I'm just trying to serve the Lord. But on top of that, I write books,
right.
And I'm very passionate about Christians putting out content, and that's why I like what you're doing here with the podcast. We need more. We need more. Not just Christian content, but content created by Christians, to take back the culture. At least that's my view. So I have my books. I have a YouTube channel of my own that I've put on pause, just because this summer my wife and I are directing a farmers market in our town. So that has taken up just so much of my time.
I can imagine. Yeah.
But that's another thing we're doing. That's another iron in our fire. And
don't you hate it when real life gets involved? Don't you hate when real life kind of crowds in on your internet time and your internet existence?
Right. You want to keep doing this kind of stuff,
right?
But something has to go at some point. So I will get back to YouTube, and you understand fully,
right?
But I'll get back to it. But real life has to take front seat.
Yeah, and
so,
by the way, as we're talking about that, I should mention, just prefacing this whole program right now, real life is encroaching upon my podcasting life right now. So two things for the listeners to note. Number one, I'm in my classroom today, as if you're watching this, you can see. But because of that, it's really hot outside. We have a window AC in this room, and there is a little noise in the background, but there is no chance I am shutting this off. There's no chance the AC is going off. So if you hear some background noise, again, this as I tried to stress in my first episode, this is a hobby for me. I'm not a professional podcaster. I'm not going to be a professional podcaster. And so that AC is definitely absolutely staying on. And then number two, my morning has been a lot crazier than expected because I overslept this morning and misinterpreted a text from my wife. And so I'm all messed up. So I'll probably be looking at texts a bit as we're going through this interview. So Curtis, if it looks like I am just not paying attention to what you're saying, it's not just because you're boring. It's, my wife is texting. No. But we're not going to be talking about.
Well, to piggyback on that.
Yes.
To piggyback on that, my kids are in the back room watching Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory right now. So if you hear the sound of screaming children running down the hall, that's that. So
this week
real life is
running.
We both are dealing with real life.
Yes.
Stuff.
So wait.
Yeah, it's mine. It's
important
mine.
question. Which version of Willy Wonka? The original, the Gene Wilder, or the new one?
Right now they're watching Gene Wilder.
Okay, that's classic. That's good.
But the reason they fell in love with the Gene Wilder movie is because of the latest what's the young kid, I don't even know his name. It's called
Wonka.
Yeah. It's called Wonka. And
so they saw that
they loved that movie. Yeah, they saw Wonka first.
Okay.
And because of that, they wanted to watch Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And I was like, hey, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so Wonka is the prequel, right?
Yeah.
So don't say much more about that because I haven't seen it yet. But I am going to next week in our town here in Beloit, Wisconsin. We have a theater over the summer that does like $2 movies for kids each week. And next week is Wonka. I've signed up because I haven't seen it yet. So I'm going to get the full cinematic experience. Don't ruin it for me. That's very important.
No, I won't. But I will tell you. Do you like musicals?
I'm
Okay.
on the fence. I'm on the fence.
See, I love musicals.
Okay.
I love musicals, and I found it an excellent movie. So.
All right. See, musicals for me, it depends. It depends. I don't know. I haven't like Sound of Music type thing, I could go with.
Sure.
But like West Side Story, not so much.
Okay.
So if it's somewhat realistic, I don't know. But is Sound of Music a musical? Would you consider? That's a musical, isn't it?
Yeah, I consider. Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. But
no,
anyway.
how are we going to segue? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah. So speaking of Sound of Music, I have no idea where I'm going with this.
Turning the Book of Job into a musical, and I don't know.
Man, that'd be like a depressing musical. That'd be like a country western musical or something. Job with a little bit of twang to it. Job with a little bit of twang. That should be the title of this podcast right here.
Job with a twang.
But
wow.
Anyway, we are talking about Job because you are an author on top of everything else that you do. And this is the latest book you've written, right? Or at least published.
Yes, it is. Yes, sir.
Okay, so
it's hard to keep them all straight.
Yeah. Matt, you've written several books. In fact, you can find out more. We'll have the link to all those. Like you and I, we've talked about in previous podcasts with my other podcasts, we've talked about The Woman at the Well.
Judges.
And Judges, yes. Did we talk about Haman? I remember I've read your book on Haman. And Esther. I don't know if we did a podcast on that.
No, I don't think we did because I know we definitely did. Our first conversation was about Judges,
right?
And I believe I've only been on twice. I think this is my third.
So third time's a charm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, but we're talking about Judges here today. No, we're talking
Yes.
about Job here today. Wow. Like I said, things are getting mixed up. So we're talking about Job, and I really did enjoy this book. And that's one thing about this podcast that's going to separate from the other podcast. The other podcast, anybody, any author that showed up and gave me a free book would come on the podcast, and I'd do it. I'm being a lot more picky this time. And so, Curtis, you made the cut with this podcast.
Thank you.
And so I really did enjoy this book.
Honestly, I have the badge of honor.
So understanding the book of Job
I appreciate that.
is really insightful. We were talking before we started recording, and when I cover the book of Job, as I teach through it, I ask my students, tell me the book of Job. Tell me what happened. You know the story, right? Oh, yeah, we know the story, Mr. Thompson. So, yeah, Job's a good guy, and God tests him, and Satan he takes all these things away from him. But then he's a good guy, so at the end, he gets all the stuff back. And I said, okay, well, you've heard the book of Job. That's great. But you just talked about maybe 2 or 3 chapters of a 42-chapter book. So
Right.
Is it possible that we have completely missed the point of this story?
Right.
And I think the answer is yes. Right. And so one of the things you mentioned is that the point of this story is not even Job himself, but it's the character of God. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Exactly. Well, first off, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Because I was kind of anticipating that. If you were writing a book,
yes,
what would the first part of your book be about? Would it be about the main character, or would it be about a secondary character?
It would be about
if you're
the main
establishing.
character. Yeah,
it would be, right. So remember, the book of Job is the first book of the Bible that was written.
right.
And I know that goes against our, we think in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and certainly Genesis chronologically is beginning, but Job was written, Job was written before Genesis was.
Yeah.
So, you gotta keep that in mind. And when you do, you realize that a lot of the book of Job is not about Job himself.
Yeah.
You look at what the 4 friends are talking about. They're called the 3 friends because the last guy is technically not a friend. But anyway,
yeah.
You look at what the friends are talking about. They're talking about God. You look at God himself when he comes and begins to talk to Job. What does he talk about? He's not like, hey, Job, here's why I'm putting you through these things.
Right.
No, God talks to Job and says, hey, were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? And were you there when I did this? And were you there? And can you do this? And can you do that? It all goes back to God himself.
Yeah.
And at the very ending of the book, God does not heal Job because Job prayed for his friends.
Right.
And I think I made a comment of that. Instead, we see that God goes to these friends and he says to them, you spoke of me that which is not true. That's paraphrasing it. But you spoke of me that which is not true. He wasn't feeling indignation for Job. God was having indignation over himself. Like, you said these things that are not true concerning me. So that is the entire point of Job, is an understanding of the nature and the character of God. And sometimes we may never understand why we go through the trials we go through, but we can't know that we have a just God. And like I said near the ending of my book, Job probably never knew why he went through his trials. At the ending of the book, it never shows, hey, Job, by the way, me and Satan, we had this little talk.
Right.
Job probably never found out.
Yep.
And maybe even when he got to heaven, he may have never found out. Yeah, he could have gone to God and asked, Lord, why'd you put me through that? And God could have very easily said, it's none of your business.
Yeah.
I don't know. But either way, it was at least until after he died that Job finally figured it out. And that's the whole thing, is that we can go through trials, we can go through these difficulties, understanding that God is still good, God is still just, and God, frankly, can do whatever He wants to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I got preaching. I'm sorry.
No, that's fun. You're a preacher. You're supposed to do that. Um, I like what you said there, but Job
Right.
never found
By the
out.
way, my voice is
I I lost your audio there for a second.
I was just saying, my voice might be a little croaky.
Oh, that's fine.
I was sick last week, so if I start squealing around here, that's why. But
Okay.
anyway,
Well, I like your point about the fact that Job wasn't um, told at the end. There wasn't the great reveal. And again, if this were a book about Job, that's what you'd expect at the end. Okay, God says, let me explain what happened. And I love the show Monk, the TV show Monk, and at the end of each episode, okay, here's what happened. They'll tell who the murderer is, whatever. So there's no grand reveal, and I really, like you said, it's sometimes we have this idea that when we get to heaven, then we'll know everything, or we're going to get answers, because that's where I think that whole viewpoint does is it puts God on trial, as if God has to answer for himself. Okay, here's what I did. So see, I was really justified in what I did, and you were wrong in thinking that. No, it's not about God justifying himself. It's God bringing someone to himself. Hey, focus on me. And when we get to heaven, I don't think it's going to be finally, okay, now God's going to tell me why I went through this or why. I think when we get to heaven, we're going to be so enamored in the presence of God. I'm not sure if we're going to
right.
be sitting there thinking about, oh, yeah, I'm going to recall every problem I ever had in my life, and now I'm going to get the answers. I think we're going to be like, whoa, this is amazing. I'm seeing God as I never have before. How can I even focus on anything else?
Right. Well, it's like the them and the things of earth will grow strangely dim.
Right.
Um, those things won't. Why would it matter
Right.
anymore? So, but yeah, exactly. Even the ending lends itself to the fact that this book is not about Job himself, but
Yeah.
it's about God. Um,
One of the other
and
things you mentioned in the book, a little side note, but I want to throw it out there anyway. I think one of the other mischaracterizations that I've been guilty of, and I never really thought about it, but Mrs. Job, Job's wife, um, she's an angry woman. Job cursed God and died. Wow.
right.
Of all the things that God took away everything but his wife. And I have been very critical of her, and I've heard other preachers, and Tim Hawkins has a fun little comedy bit on her. And you bring out the point that, hey, give her a break. We've been focusing on Job, and as you mentioned, that's not the correct focus. But if we step back for a moment, we realize she's suffering too. She went through
Yeah.
everything that Job went through, and that's not a fair. You're not giving her a fair shot, or I haven't been giving her a fair shot.
Right. Yeah. She lost all of her kids. Um, which that by itself
Right.
was deeply. You can even argue that hurt her more than it hurt Job.
Yeah.
I'm not going to compare the love of father and a mother, but that was a deeply hurtful thing. She lost all of her wealth. I get it. I get why some preachers, give the whole curse God and die,
Yeah.
mentality to her. But it's like she has to watch her husband suffer every single day.
Yeah.
There has to be something in her that is just breaking for him. God doesn't give Job a new wife when he's healed.
Yeah.
He has all those children afterward with her. At
Right.
least that's the message doesn't say otherwise.
Yeah.
So my assumption is in a twisted way and in a incorrect way. She was acting in a loving way. Now she was wrong, but
right. But you know, what would I say in that circumstance?
Right.
You know,
You're watching your spouse suffer
right.
every single day. And you know the reason why.
Yeah.
So
so let's give her a break.
Right. Right.
All right. So
go
ahead.
I don't know how I'd respond.
Yeah. None of us would. None of us would. And being frail human beings and sinners on top of that, you know, I've gone through difficult times. You've gone through difficult times. And we've all said things that we regret and things that we look back on and say, oh, in the heat of the moment, I shouldn't have done that. But let's talk about some more people that said things that they shouldn't have said. And let's talk about these miserable comforters, these so-called friends of Job. And I'm sure they are friends of Job, but that's, I think, the crux of this book, or the meat in between the sandwich ends, is the conversations between Job and his friends. And they represent different viewpoints that I think we still struggle with today. Wrong views of God and wrong views of suffering that we go through. So we have Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, Elihu, and you've done a really good job of summarizing kind of where they're coming from in this book. In fact, I've updated some of my Old Testament survey notes, and I like the way you've summarized these better than I do. So Eliphaz, nice guy.
I appreciate it.
No problem. He's a nice guy. He's trying to be a comfort, but he's got a wrong philosophy. And basically, he summarizes, says, righteousness, he says, will always bring happiness, bring joy, bring reward, and sin will always bring suffering. So obviously, Job, you must have done something wrong. But we still have that mentality. That mentality is in the church today.
Oh yeah. Well, frankly, hold on.
Sure.
Frankly, this is why I wrote the book.
Yeah.
Is because of this mentality. I could in the top 3 most dangerous philosophies in the church today, I would say that the prosperity gospel is in that top 3.
Yeah.
If not number 1. Because you have all these young Christians who they have this idea that if I start living for Jesus and if I start doing what's right and if I start going to church and if I start reading my Bible, life is going to be easy and I'm always going to get the things that I want.
Yep.
And you have preachers that are saying exactly that to them. Right. And then when things don't go that way, well, they crumble. Yep. Because they weren't on solid ground to begin with.
Right.
So this is a dangerous philosophy. And it's overtaken the American church.
Yeah.
And
I think it's overtaken the church in a way that's not as obvious as people think. Because it's easy to look at a guy like Benny Hinn or that ilk, and they're doing all the weird healings and things like that, and they're promising, you send me your seed money and we'll. But I think in good conservative churches, you still have that mindset of, if I do what's right, God will bless me. If I'm doing what's wrong, God will get me.
Right. Well, I've had church members in the past. They've come up to me and they've said, I wasn't gonna go to church today, and I had all these different problems and all that. But you know what? I came, and I'm gonna have a good week because of it.
Yeah.
And I caution them. I said, "Well, hold on, no, that's not how this works. You don't come to church because you want to have a good week. You come to church out of obedience to the Lord.
Right.
You're not guaranteed a good week just because you sat in the pew today.
Yep.
And yeah, and that's just a tiny little instance of
Right.
that infiltrating our minds.
Yeah, I think that's something that we constantly have to fight about or fight against. The idea, well, if I'm going through a bad time, I wonder what I did wrong. I wonder where it's a very transactional relationship with God. I do this, God does that. I do this, God does this
Right.
other thing. And that's not how all this works. And that's still a focus on me.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Right,
Yeah.
so that's Eliphaz. So Bildad, he's a little he doesn't
Yeah.
have the right, the same attitude as Eliphaz. But hey, made a mistake, you gotta repent and everything will get better. Again,
Right.
not how this works.
And each of these guys, they, you might be listening, you might say, well, you just said the exact same thing as before. They're all very similar
Right.
with shades of differences about them. And so with Eliphaz, um, he was unwilling to really even say that Job had done something, or at least at first.
Yeah.
But here Bildad is telling him actively, hey, you need to repent. You need to repent. You need to
Yeah.
repent. Um, so and again, Job up to this point hadn't done anything wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's the big difference. Repentance will bring happiness and prosperity.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, uh, prosperity. I said prosperity gospel. God does bring prosperity, with obedience, but prosperity doesn't always mean the same thing
Right.
that we think that prosperity means, right? I can hear people now saying, "Well, what about where God says this, where God says this, and God will make my way prosperous and yada yada yada."
Yeah.
Well, prosperity does not necessarily mean you're going to have money in the bank
Right.
and you're going to have money in the bank and good health.
Right.
Um, so and this is another area where his friends were wrong.
Yeah.
Um, prosperity is success. And we could argue even this, I didn't really write about this. We could argue even up to this point that Job was prosperous because he was being successful through his trial.
Yeah.
Um, so again, their paradigm of success is completely messed up.
Right. And I think it's kind of an Americanized 21st century idea that we have in mind that
All right.
even the author of Job or even, you know, uh, Joshua or some of the psalmists had in mind when we're talking about success or prosperity. We don't have the same things in mind. I think we've been conditioned in our modern culture to think of success and prosperity in terms of material wealth that was unknown, even just decades ago in our country.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
so that,
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, and going back again to the whole prosperity gospel
yeah,
thing, that is a false teaching that could only work here in 21st century
right,
United States of
right,
America. The Apostle Paul would hear that. Well, goodness, any of the apostles
yeah,
would hear the prosperity gospel, and I don't know if they'd laugh or cry, or maybe
right.
both.
Yeah, you look at there was some, oh man, I saw this on Facebook years ago, and I wish I had saved these, but somebody had taken quotes from Joel Osteen and basically put them together with pictures of Christians suffering in different countries. And
Right.
obviously they don't match. And
No.
um, these are people who
And that's
are,
today.
yeah, today. And these are people who are more dedicated in their faith than many in our American churches. These are people who are going out of their way to, and sometimes even risking their lives and whatever prosperity they have in order to serve God, in order even sometimes to just attend a church service. But that doesn't work for them. But they are successful in God's eyes, and they are. If you ask them, there's many things in their lives they can look to and say, "This is God has blessed us." But we just have that wrong idea. So Zophar, he's an angry guy. He's demanding, hey, you can't question God. And hey, and I hate this. I've heard this before so many times, and I think we're really tempted to go in this direction as conservatives. Other people have it worse than you, so what are you crying about? It's like a bad baseball coach.
I'm guilty of giving that advice in the past, and frankly, reading the book of Job has helped me as a counselor.
Right.
Sometimes the best way to be a comfort to somebody is to just shut your mouth and hug them.
Yeah. I'm not a hugger, but I agree. Sometimes it's just that listen, just let someone talk and be there with them and support them in that time. And that's difficult because you want to kind of solve the problem. You kind of want to leave with them.
Right.
Oh, okay. My wife left me and I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills. But, there's somebody in Africa who's starving to death. So I guess I'm not so bad. I don't think anyone's like, oh, yeah, I guess everything's fine now.
I'm fine now.
Yeah, perfect. I didn't realize people were suffering worse than me. That doesn't help in the moment.
No, your feelings are legitimate, and what you are going through is what you are going through. Why belittle that? And again, I've been guilty of that in the past myself, and I was clearly wrong, and I clearly did not help anyone I said that to. Right. But this guy Zophar, he's just kind of a jerk.
Right.
In fact, I wouldn't even, we talk about Job's three friends. I would not call Zophar a friend. Goodness, he just wants to see Job in trouble.
Yep.
He does say one thing that I do agree with. On a larger scale, he really, what Zophar is saying is you're not getting what you deserve.
Yeah.
And to a degree, I agree with that. And frankly, for all three of the friends, I think on a grander scale, they're correct.
Yeah.
But like here, you're not getting all that you deserve. Well, okay. What he is meaning is not the same thing as what he's saying, right?
Yeah.
What he's trying to say is, hey, God should be giving you twice as many boils because you're a terrible, awful person. Whereas, when you look at the nature of God, well, we don't. What do we deserve from God? Well, we deserve nothing. The Bible says we deserve nothing but an eternal damnation in hell.
Yeah.
So in a way, Zophar is speaking the truth, but he's not.
Right.
So,
and, one of the things you actually mentioned, what I like in the beginning of this chapter, let's see if I didn't write this note down. I should have, but maybe it was even at the beginning of the book. Somewhere in this book that I definitely read, you write that one of the reasons why you're summarizing this is because there is a lot of flowery theological sounding language in here.
Oh,
and I think that we do in our, again, even our conservative Christian churches, I think a lot of bad theology is found and mixed up within flowery theological language that sounds great, but actually there's nothing solid behind it. But it sounds good.
Right. Well, and that is a caution with reading these chapters. If
Yeah.
you're a young Christian and you are reading these chapters without a basic understanding of what's going on, you could be reading this stuff and be like, yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, sure. You could the entire time through.
Right.
Um, while the entire time they're wrong.
Yeah.
God even comes out and says they're wrong. Um,
I hate it when God ruins your
uh,
theology. You know that so
right.
inconvenient. Let's go to
Uh,
Elihu. He's a young guy. He's been waiting this entire time, kind of in the background, waiting for his
right,
turn to speak, out of respect for his elders. Um, and of these four, he's probably the closest to being right. And as you mentioned correctly, that God doesn't actually condemn or speak out against him in the way he does with these other guys. But again, it's still um, in that same vein. Don't question God's judgment. You know, you need to renounce your own self-righteousness. You need to just do right no matter what the reward is with anything attached. And that's all correct to a degree, but not
right,
necessarily what Job is going through at the moment.
right. Well, um, for one, it's interesting. Elihu is not even. I count him as one of the friends.
Yeah,
I say the four friends, but there's a lot of people that don't even count him.
right.
And I don't understand why that is. I mean, he says a lot less than the other three. Maybe that's part of it. No, well, this was not necessarily what Job needed to hear.
Yeah.
Um, I will say, I don't think I ever actually wrote this
Okay,
in
exclusive
this
content right
chapter.
here on this podcast.
Um, yeah, there you go. With all the other three, did I write this? In anticipation of our podcast here, I actually have the chapter here because I had a feeling this is the chapter we'd be talking about. Um, I may not. Anyway, with the other three friends, Job decides to stand up for himself, defend himself.
Yeah,
But with Elihu, the passage makes the point to say that Job he remained silent through it.
okay, now I'm
He didn't
disappointed.
defend himself with Elihu.
I'm disappointed now because there is no exclusive content that is in the book.
That is in the book.
That is in the
Okay.
book. Okay,
All right. There you
continue.
go. So yeah, but yeah, so Job holds his peace, which ultimately is Job's way of
Hello?
saying, you know what? I agree. And I'll wait.
Okay. Okay. Give me a minute. Excuse me, I had a phone call there. I'll edit that out.
No worries. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, that was ultimately Job's way of saying, yeah, you're right. I agree. Um, Elihu was not pointing out some hypothetical sin that Job was committing. He was pointing out the sin that Job was committing right then and right there. Um, he, in questioning why God was doing what he was doing, he was essentially beginning to question the goodness of God.
Yeah.
Um, and that is one thing that you do see throughout. And again, you can't really blame Job here because I've maybe I've oversimplified the friends, but you're talking about round after round after round of them attacking Job. This wasn't just Eliphaz saying one thing and then Bildad saying one thing and then Zophar saying one thing. I think all three of those friends got at least 3 shots at him.
Yeah.
You're talking about 9 rounds of just attack after attack after attack after attack. And finally, near the ending there, Job has had it.
Right.
He's like, I can't take this anymore. Oh, what miserable comforters ye are. Um, so by then, by the ending there, he does start saying some things that are declaring his own righteousness while in a way questioning the goodness of God. Again, I can't blame him for that.
Right.
Because he's being put on trial by these three guys. Um, so Elihu rightly calls out what he was saying, but goodness gracious, I mean, I think if any of us had three friends come to us and just constantly bombarding us, telling us how terrible of people we are, um, I think
Yeah.
at some point I'm going to slip up and say something inappropriate.
Don't do that yet. Don't ruin your ministry over this podcast. But no, I get exactly what you're saying.
No worries.
And so, yes, wrapping things up, it's just a great book, and this chapter is only one chapter out of what is it, 5 chapters, I think altogether.
I believe
If I'm
so,
not
yeah.
correcting.
It's a short
And
book.
it is. It's a short book. It's readable, even for old guys like me. The font is easy to read, and so the size of the print and all
Good.
that stuff. I have to worry about that stuff now. But the last point I wanted to bring up, and you mentioned this kind of in the closing chapter, and we've talked about this a little bit here, that there's no magic bullet at the end. There's no, this is how you get out of suffering. Okay, Job, Job had a problem. Here it is. He did this, and boom, done. And so, therefore, when you have a problem, you do this, boom, and it's done. That's not, again, that's a huge misconception people might bring out of this book.
Right. Well, I've heard preachers say, you probably too. I've heard preachers say, they go to the end of the book and they say, when Job prayed for his friends, God took away Job's suffering. And once you stop focusing on yourself and focus on others, God will take away your suffering.
Right.
And nope, that ain't it. If that's what you got out of the book of Job, read it again.
Right. That's not, and that really, that leads to a whole different world of hurt if you have that philosophy. But even more importantly than that, you're missing the point of Job and the grand point of, I would even say, existent human existence, which is look at God.
Right.
Get your mind off of yourself, focus on who He is, and one of the things you're going to see through this is that A, God is sovereign, but also that B, God is sufficient.
Right.
And if I just had one more S word, it would be a great sermon. But God is sufficient in the midst of your suffering. God is sufficient. And it's because He's sovereign and that we can count on Him. And even when I was just interviewing somebody else in their book, they had mentioned that sometimes when we want to question God, and as Job sometimes does, he's wondering, where is the daysman, where is the mediator between God and man? And he's wondering, he's questioning. It's almost like a parent holding a fighting toddler. It's kicking and screaming and not sure what to do. But hey, in the midst of that, God still has you secure. You're not going anywhere. And even though you don't understand what's going on, He does. And God's strong enough to withstand your little temper tantrum and your pouting for a moment and realizing, hey, there's a plan behind this.
Right. Yeah. That's the book of Job.
All right. Well, thank you, Curtis, for joining us again. Not again, I guess on the first time for this podcast, but I hope there will be an again on the podcast. And just thank you for your time.
Well, I always enjoy I enjoyed talking to you on
Yeah.
this episode.
Yeah.
But I always enjoy having a chance to talk with you. And thanks for having me on.
Well, I hope you're going to come on again, and I'm sure there'll be more books in the future, and maybe even there might even become a time where we don't even have to talk about a book, and we could just
Yeah.
chat
Yeah.
Marvel and
I
DC
love
or
that.
something. But
There you go. I'll
But,
tell you, I have one book. I have a book that's almost out of the hopper.
ooh,
And
Give us the preview.
I'm more excited about this book than any book I've ever written. What?
give us the preview.
What was that?
Give us the preview.
It's called. In fact, okay, this is an exclusive.
Okay, this
by
is
the
the
way.
exclusive.
I guess because I know so many people care. So many people
Yes.
care. It is a new book I've written based on our church's theme for this year, and it's called "The God I Know."
Hmm.
I don't know if you've heard the song "The God I Know Can Still Move Mountains."
Yeah.
So what I've done is I have gone to the different mountains of the Bible, and from those mountains, I've written about instead of telling like a straight story about Mount Ararat or Mount Sinai or the things that happened there. Instead, we kind of look at it from a different angle, and we learn more about, just like the book of Job, the person and the character of God.
Yeah.
So, what does Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark, what does that teach us about God himself? What does Mount Moriah teach us about God? What does Mount Zion?
Hmm.
What does that teach us about God? And I'm just incredibly excited about it.
Well, that sounds exciting to me.
In fact, if you haven't noticed, yeah. And if you haven't noticed, I enjoy writing about, I mean, since you've read the book of Job,
Right.
since you've read my book on the book of Job, that's something I just enjoy writing about. I enjoy writing about just God.
Yeah.
And this is going to put it to a whole other level.
All right. Well, you've heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. We have the exclusive preview of the next book down the line. So,
There you go.
and we'll have a link to you've got a Facebook page for Proverbs 120 Media. We'll have a link to that, and you can find
Yes, sir.
more. And we'll have a link to your YouTube page as well, so you can get caught up before he jumps back in. Get caught up on all the previous podcasts there and all the recordings there. And again, there's a whole bunch of books that you can look through. We've only mentioned just a couple on this podcast, so I'd urge you to go back and buy them all without even knowing what they're about.
Amen.
Just, if it says Curtis King on it, you just buy it. You know you're going to be blessed by it later. And do I get like a finder's fee for this, or?
well, we'll see.
Well,
I have the analytics.
I've got.
Except don't buy the one that says mental escape. I didn't write that one, and I'm not sure why that shows up on my page.
Okay.
I don't.
Well, I'll use my Amazon affiliate links to promote those. That way, I'll guarantee.
There you go.
I'll get 3 cents from that or something.
Does that work for author books and all that?
I think so. Maybe it does.
Oh,
I don't know. I don't really. I just started this, so we'll find out. So if the next time you see me, I'm driving a Cadillac or whatever, you'll know it works. Although I probably wouldn't be driving. I'd probably be driving more of a Lambo than a Cadillac. But anyway, all right. So check out our website at amputatedbaptist.com, where you can find all of those links and many other things in previous episodes. So until next time, have a good rest of your week.
Singing praises, strumming banjo strings all day. Amputated Baptist Podcast, where we all belong. Join the harmony, let it carry us along.